I walked into my house thinking it was just another late night at work. What I found instead ended my marriage, upended my family, and changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty. "Hey, it's Bill," I said quickly into the phone, half distracted as I tried to finish up the latest tweaks to a project brief. It was your standard chaotic Monday, the kind where clients suddenly remember they had big weekend ideas and toss them at us last minute, expecting magic by Monday morning. And of course that magic usually landed on my plate. "Hey, it's me," came my wife's voice on the other end. There was a tension in her tone I recognized too well. Probably the stress of juggling everything at home. She'd always been the one holding the reins when it came to keeping our family on track. Schedules, appointments, you name it. If anyone deserved the title of household coordinator, it was her. "I just wanted to know what time you'll be back tonight," she asked, and I could hear the hint of hope in her voice, like she was wishing for something better than the usual. "Hard to say," I muttered, eyes glued to the screen while navigating through the CD files. Joe had just dumped a fresh pile of updates for the Johnson build on my desk, and the contractor needed them by tonight. "If all goes well, maybe a couple more hours. But don't wait up for dinner, all right? I'll have Heather place an order for us just in case." I could almost feel her silent disappointment through the phone. My boss had this habit of pushing late evening deadlines right when people should be heading home. And truthfully, it had sparked more than one tense conversation between my wife and me. I've been working as an architect for a commercial firm that handles big-name properties. About 5 years ago I was bumped up to project manager, came with a nice salary boost, but also a heap of longer days and heavier responsibility. Days like today served as a reminder of just how much I had to put personal life on pause to meet a client's deadline. When you're managing large-scale builds, timing is everything. If those plans aren't in the contractor's hands on schedule, the domino effect can cause delays, legal issues, and financial penalties, some of which fall directly on me. Our firm doesn't play around when it comes to holding project managers accountable. What made it tougher was how little notice we got about these so-called urgent updates. The last few years haven't been kind to the industry either. We've been under pressure from all sides. Ironically, it's our success that's made things worse. My team had built up a name for ourselves by pulling off complex builds under ridiculous timelines. We got a reputation, and with that came more high-maintenance clients. Folks who think it's totally fine to request big changes after everything's already set in motion. And yet, my boss never blinked. No matter how unrealistic the demands, I was still expected to meet them. He might have privately agreed that our clients were unreasonable. Some of their requests were downright absurd, but in front of everyone else he kept pushing the line, "Just get it done, Bill." It was obvious that the company's sky-high fees had convinced him to bite his tongue. As long as those invoices were padded with premium charges, the inconvenience we suffered seemed worth it in his eyes. Eventually, he did agree to sit down with me and talk about establishing more realistic deadlines. That gave me a little hope, but the truth is I still couldn't understand why I felt so uneasy about all the extra hours I was putting in. After all, my wife Natalie had her own demanding job as a financial analyst. She was no stranger to long days and tight turnarounds either. We had both accepted that sometimes responsibility meant sacrifice. It came with the promotions, the pay bumps, the expectations. I rarely brought it up. What was the point in complaining when this was the life we'd both chosen? For the most part, we had found a rhythm. We tried to prioritize time away, family trips, weekend getaways, something to counter the grind. But still, the tension had been building for a while, and I guess I'd ignored just how much it was starting to show. We'd both become skilled at skirting tough conversations. Instead of facing the problems head-on, we let things stew in silence. It was easier that way, or at least it felt easier at the time. No one had ever outright accused anyone of crossing the line, but I could feel something in the air. There was a quiet suspicion that neither of us wanted to put into words. Somewhere along the way, I even stopped mentioning Heather, our assistant at the office, in conversation. Not because I had anything to hide, God knows there was nothing inappropriate between us, but because I feared the mention alone might spark a reaction. Natalie hadn't said anything, but I could sense a certain unease, and I didn't want to make things worse. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for what came next. She sat down across from me, expression unreadable. I remember thinking her posture was too still, too composed. There was no anger, just this cold calm that sent a chill down my spine. Then she spoke. Flat, emotionless. "I want a divorce." At first I thought I'd misheard her. "What?" I blinked. You're not serious?" I asked it softly, almost like I didn't want to hear the answer. My hands were frozen on the table, my eyes locked onto hers, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, a moment of frustration. But she wouldn't meet my gaze. I stared at her, trying to read between the lines. My mind was already racing, doing an inventory of my behavior, scanning back through months of late nights, missed dinners, things left unsaid. And then one name echoed in my head: Heather. She must have jumped to conclusions. That had to be it. But before I could say anything more, she cut me off. "You always said you didn't want conflict," she said, her voice sharper now, almost bitter. "You avoided every argument like it was poison. Well, this isn't something you can dodge." Her next words hit me like a freight train. "I filed for divorce because I met someone else." The floor dropped out from under me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. In that moment, all the shock drained out of me and left behind something colder, an anger that was quiet, focused, and dangerously sharp. I sat there in silence, my mind a storm beneath the surface, trying to hold myself together. Every bone in my body screamed at me to react, to raise my voice, to lash out, to demand answers. But I knew if I let myself unravel now, nothing good would come of it. Acting on rage wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't make her love me again. And it definitely wouldn't help our girls. So I breathed, slowly. I looked at her dead in the eye and said in a voice much steadier than I felt, "You're the one who blew up this marriage, Natalie. You don't get to hand me the fallout and walk away like you had nothing to do with it." Her face paled a little at that, and I felt the anger bubbling up again, hotter this time, sharper. "Go," I said firmly. "Move in with your boyfriend or wherever it is you run off to when you're done pretending to be part of this family. I don't care. In fact, you can pack your bags tonight." She looked stunned, mouth open like she was searching for words that just wouldn't come. Finally she stammered, "But what about the girls? Bill, this is their home." I let out a breath that was half disbelief, half exhaustion. "Now you're worried about them?" I asked, my voice cold. "Where was that concern when you were sneaking around? When you decided this family wasn't enough for you?" She didn't answer. She just stared down at her hands, and for a brief moment, all I saw was regret written across her face. But that didn't change the facts. And it certainly didn't fix what was already broken. As furious as I was, deep down I knew one thing: we had to shield our daughters from the full weight of this. They deserved better than to be caught in the crossfire of our failures. I wasn't going to turn them into pawns in this ugly chapter of our lives. So even though I wanted to scream, I bit my tongue and tried to remember that being their father meant staying grounded, even now. "I'm not going to tell them everything," I said after a pause. "If you want to tell them the truth, that's your decision. But don't turn me into the villain just because you're looking for a way out. They don't need to carry that weight." I drained the last of my drink and thought about pouring another. The bottle was only a few feet away, and for a second the idea of numbing it all sounded tempting. But I knew better. That road didn't lead anywhere good. Rubbing the back of my neck, I glanced over at her again. "I can't do this tonight, Natalie. Not another argument. Not more lies. I'm empty." The girls were supposed to be home by then. When they didn't show up on time, I found myself pacing the living room like a caged animal. My thoughts wouldn't stop, each one more bitter than the last. Then I saw headlights. Her car. And strangely, I didn't feel rage anymore. Not even sadness. Just this dull ache of pity. I felt sorry for her. For the way things had spiraled. And maybe a little sorry for myself too, for still holding on even when the grip was cutting into me. But what truly shook me happened just hours earlier. Claire Johnson, Alan's wife, had stopped by unexpectedly. She was quiet at first, almost unsure if she should even be there. But then she told me what she'd come to say. She'd been following Alan and Natalie for months, gathering evidence, watching her husband betray her with the same woman who now sat on my couch, asking for a divorce. She had photos, messages, receipts, proof. Everything I tried so hard to ignore, laid bare. Over time, resentment between Natalie and me hardened into something ugly and exhausting. It started as a few cold shoulders and quiet arguments, but soon, every interaction felt like a landmine. We'd become our own version of the Hatfields and McCoys, locked in a slow, grinding battle where every look, every word carried weight. As the divorce moved forward, it was clear this wasn't going to be a peaceful process. Every detail was contested, and it began with the most painful part of all: custody of our daughters. I could feel myself being dragged into a war I didn't want, but one I knew I had to fight for. Just when I felt like I was slipping under, Laura stepped in. She had always been my anchor, the kind of person who doesn't let you spiral without calling you out. Technically, she's my cousin, but that title doesn't even begin to describe our bond. She's been my best friend since before I even knew what friendship meant. We'd been inseparable growing up, from elementary all the way through high school. Kids used to tease us, but we didn't care. We had each other's backs always. Laura wasn't just close, she was like a sister, like a twin, only not by birth. We looked nothing alike, and our personalities were different enough to tell us apart in any room. But the connection? That was something special. There was never anything romantic between us. God, the idea of kissing her would be like kissing a mirror. No thanks. She was part of me in a way that's hard to explain, and right now, I needed that more than ever. When things got really ugly, Laura was the one who helped me think clearly. Natalie had started to spin the narrative in a way that made me look like the bad guy, like I was trying to cut her off from the girls. I didn't want to ruin her reputation or paint her as a bad mother. But after what happened, after the affair with Alan, things had changed. Claire Johnson, Alan's wife, had already collected damning proof of the affair. It wasn't just text messages. She'd followed them, documented everything, and she'd handed all of it over to me. That evidence became a focal point in our strategy. The idea was to show the court that Natalie's continued relationship with Alan could be a threat to our girls' stability. Not out of vengeance, but because it was true. At the same time, I felt torn. I wasn't looking to destroy Natalie, I just didn't know any other way to protect my daughters and maintain some kind of influence in their lives. But Laura wasn't about to let me take the low road. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Don't let this pain make you cruel, Bill. I've seen what happens when people let divorce turn them into monsters. You'll end up hating each other more than you already do, and the only ones who'll walk away smiling are the lawyers." Her voice cut through my frustration like a blade. "Think about the girls," she added. "Think about what a messy, bitter custody fight will do to them. Ask yourself if it's worth it." I couldn't shake her words. They stuck with me, echoed in my head while I sat in the quiet of my empty living room. I thought about my boss Joe, who once told me he was lucky to see his kids twice a year. That hit me harder than I expected. Could that really be my future? With that thought in my head, I finally called my attorney. I told him I wanted to explore joint custody. I didn't want to erase Natalie from the girls' lives, I just wanted to be present in them too. Laura's visit stirred up more than just paperwork. It forced me to reevaluate everything, how I was handling the split, how I was processing the grief, and most importantly, what kind of father I wanted to be during and after all this. I tried changing the subject after a while, desperate for something lighter, anything to escape the pressure of it all. But Laura wasn't done. She was relentless in the best way. "When are you going to stop pitying yourself, Bill?" she asked. "You've been stuck in this fog for weeks. I get it, you're hurting. But at some point you've got to decide if you're going to stay here, or start pulling yourself out." Laura let out one of her trademark dramatic sighs, the kind she saved for moments when she was about to drop the truth whether I wanted to hear it or not. "All right," she said, folding her arms. "Let's start with what's clearly eating you up the most, your pride. Is your ego really that delicate, Bill?" I looked at her, unsure whether to laugh or get defensive. "Do you really believe people are going to point and laugh at you just because you got cheated on?" she asked. "Come on. Most folks out there aren't judging you, they've lived through worse themselves." She had a point, though it was hard to admit in that moment. "You think those women in your life, your coworkers, your neighbors, they're looking at you with pity? No, Bill. A lot of them have been there too. They've been cheated on, lied to, blindsided. And you know what? They got through it. So will you." She paused just long enough to let the words settle. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," she continued gently, "but I don't think what Natalie did had much to do with your bedroom life or anything you lacked. Some people just make stupid, selfish decisions. If she hadn't cheated on you with Alan, it probably would have been someone else." I sat there, trying to swallow the lump forming in my throat. "She gave up something real for nothing," Laura added. "And now that she's left with that nothing, it's on her. You, on the other hand? You've still got your dignity, if you don't throw it away trying to get revenge." Her voice softened even more. "If you really want her to feel the weight of what she did, then live your life well. Be better, not bitter. That's the win." It hit me deeper than I expected. Her words sat with me like an echo. And as I sat there quietly, it started to make sense. A few days later, I figured things were calming down. My lawyer had reassured me that everything was under control. No surprises, nothing unexpected. So I let myself breathe. Then, 5 days later, a subpoena landed on my doorstep. At that point, I'd had enough of hiding. I took everything, every message, every screenshot, every photo Claire Johnson had given me, and sent it out. One email, one list, everyone who knew us. Friends, colleagues, mutual acquaintances. I laid it all out. That evening, Laura called me again. She didn't even say hello. "So," she asked, "did that make you feel better? Did it boost your ego?" "Oh, without a doubt," I replied. Now that the mask is off and people know who she really is, I feel lighter. You sure about that? She asked. Because relief and revenge can look a lot alike at first. I didn't answer that one. Then she asked, have you talked to the girls? That question cut deep. I had tried, really, I had. I sat down with them, started to explain what happened, but I couldn't go into details. I couldn't bring myself to put that weight on their shoulders. They still looked at their mom with some version of the trust they grew up with, and I didn't want to take that from them. Natalie had everything she wanted, luxuries most people only dreamed of. Designer clothes, jewelry, twice-a-year getaways, fine dinners, a beautiful home. I gave her all of it because I believed in what we had. And she threw it away for Alan. A guy who didn't have a tenth of what we built. But that was her choice. And now it was time for me to make mine. Back in my college days, I didn't turn down much. If there was fun to be had, or a girl interested, I was in. Looking back, I won't pretend I was a saint. I had my fair share of wild nights and I chased good times like they were going out of style. But among all those adventures, one summer with Jennifer still stands out as something different. Jennifer wasn't just another fling. What we had was real, at least it felt that way. We'd started seeing each other just before my sophomore year and somehow it stuck. We went on a cruise out of New Orleans, spent weekends wandering around Kemah, Texas. Those were some of the best memories I have. She was the kind of person who made the chaos of life feel less heavy. Being with her wasn't just exciting, it felt meaningful. Like we were growing up together, side by side. She started showing up in my thoughts more than I expected. And I think she felt the same. We even talked about moving in together. But with my senior class schedule and her commitments, the timing just never worked. My classes only ran Monday through Thursday, which gave me long weekends, perfect for 3-day road trips or spontaneous plans. Our spark was still there, even if life kept pulling us in different directions. By then, I had started taking on more responsibility in the family business. Our trucking company was thriving. We had 400 trucks, 600 trailers, and more demand than we could sometimes handle. I'd travel now and then to meet with clients, but the trips were short, never more than a few days. I was still young, still restless, but the weight of the business was beginning to settle on my shoulders. One night, I was back home in my dad's office, going over proposed freight rates. It was late, quiet. The kind of stillness where you can hear your thoughts echo. Dad walked in, closed the door behind him, and took his usual seat in the leather armchair near the bookshelf. Without a word, he pulled a cigar from his humidor, clipped it, and lit it like it was part of a ritual. We talked numbers, schedules, routes. Then he said something that stopped me cold. He told me he was stepping back officially. He'd already prepared the paperwork, power of attorney, legal formalities, the whole deal. I would handle things from here on out. He mentioned that ever since his mother passed, he hadn't felt the same about the business. And with everything in place, he felt it was time to disappear for a bit. He mentioned a deep-sea fishing trip planned for the following week. Said he wouldn't be going even though he never had in the past. Truth was, it felt like he didn't want to be around when things got hard, like he was bracing for the company to hit rough waters and didn't want to watch it happen. The following Monday, I had plans to leave town again. I was loading up the car, ready to catch my flight, when I caught sight of someone in the distance, Jennifer. She was hurrying across the lot toward the terminal building and I was stunned. How did she even know I'd be here? My father clearly wasn't as discreet as he thought. Curious and honestly kind of hopeful, I parked and walked toward one of the large columns near the terminal's entrance, waiting to see if she'd come out and find me. I didn't wait long. But when I glanced back to see where she was, nothing. No reaction. No Jennifer. Just the usual crowd of travelers. And I stood there, heart racing, unsure if I'd imagined the whole thing, or if something bigger was coming that I couldn't yet see. Strangely, I didn't feel a rush of panic. No shaky hands. No surge of adrenaline. My pulse stayed steady and I just stood there, calm, too calm. It was like my mind had gone quiet, detached. What troubled me most in that moment wasn't what I heard or saw, it was how little I seemed to care. I wasn't even angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just watching. I picked up my phone, aimed the camera toward the bedroom, trying to get a better view through the doorframe. I moved slowly, carefully, listening to the muffled sounds coming from inside. I couldn't make out any clear images, but the voices were unmistakable. And just like that, it was confirmed. I didn't need to see any more. At one point I found myself holding his clothes, his shirt, his jeans. The absurdity of it hit me. If the situation weren't so gut-wrenching, it might have been laughable. But I wasn't laughing. I was standing there frozen, heart heavy, mind racing, not with fear but with something colder, something sharper. I turned to leave the house and that's when I saw it, Jennifer's purse sitting wide open on the kitchen table. Without a second thought I grabbed it. Inside were her phone, wallet, credit cards, car keys, all of it. Alongside the clothes I'd collected, I now had everything he'd brought with him too. When I stepped into the garage I spotted a spare set of keys hanging on the wall. That's when an idea began to take shape. Petty one maybe. But one that gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. After loading everything into the car I looked back once more. You'll figure this out, I muttered to myself. Then I slid behind the wheel. As I drove down the alley I caught a final glimpse of the open garage door. Jennifer was already inside. I stopped the car, placed her purse neatly on the roof, but held onto her phone, credit cards and ATM cards. Since the accounts were under my name I figured I had every right. From there I drove out of the neighborhood and toward the nearest park, about half a mile away. That's where I found him. Flat. That's what I called him. A nickname that felt too generous. I pulled up slowly. My mind had shifted into full damage control. Later, a lawyer friend of mine would explain that although the video might not be admissible in court, since Jennifer had willingly allowed him into the house, it would still serve as useful background in our case. It might not prove criminal conspiracy, but it was enough to justify legal boundaries and protective measures. Conspiracy charges were tricky, she said. They'd need proof of intent and action. But suspicion alone could lead to preemptive steps. I'll make several copies of the footage, she said calmly, her voice that of someone used to handling chaos with precision. We'll cover our bases. When I finally got a hold of Louise, another close friend of mine, I told her flat out, I walked in and found him in bed with Jennifer. The line went quiet. Louise? I asked. You still there? There was a long pause. Then finally, is this a joke, Bill? Please tell me this is some kind of sick prank. No, I said flatly. It's not a joke. Where's this guy now? I don't know, I said. And honestly, I don't care anymore. I just thought you should know, I told Louise. She was quiet for a second then asked, so, what now? What's your plan? Well, I said, my voice steady, I kicked Jennifer out. I've spoken to an attorney and started divorce proceedings. I told the girls. I don't know where Jennifer is now and honestly, I'm not interested in finding out. There was silence on the other end, followed by muffled sobs. The kind that only come when someone's holding in too much for too long. Louise didn't cry for Jennifer, but for what had been lost. For the children. For me. The girls visited their grandparents a week later. We made it clear before the visit that their mother wouldn't be there. They understood, at least as much as any child can in a situation like this. 2 years have passed since that day. The divorce went through without complication. Jennifer never signed the papers, never showed up in court, never contested a thing. She didn't even ask about the expensive jewelry she'd left locked away in the safe. It was like she had vanished from her own life. As for Lenny, Flat as I still call him, no one mentioned his name again. He faded into the background like a bad dream you stop talking about because it doesn't even hurt anymore. The girls still haven't seen their mother. Occasionally they'll visit her parents, but there's been no outreach, no letters, no calls from Jennifer. The space she left behind is just space. Empty. Unfilled. On the business side I poured myself into work. My father's company, built around the creation of small, precision-engineered parts for massive industrial machines, had been my second home for years. Those parts, our specialty, were crucial to the operation of massive equipment used in factories around the globe. And because our alloy formula was patented, our company held a unique place in the industry. My father also co-founded a sister company with one of his cousins. Between the two businesses, we carved out a legacy built on innovation and trust. It was more than just metal and machinery, it was something that stood for our name. But not everyone shared that view. Jennifer once tried to convince me to sell, to walk away from this life and start fresh somewhere else. We could live anywhere, she said with excitement, like a teenager with a new map. But I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My silence made my position clear. I run a company with 300 employees under my leadership. That's not just a number, it's 300 families depending on us. Selling would mean putting their futures at risk. That's not a decision I could live with. These people have given me loyalty, effort, trust, and I intend to return it tenfold. This company is a legacy. My father's vision. My responsibility now. And in moments like this, I believe in acting not with hesitation but with certainty. Not with a hammer, but with a sledgehammer if necessary. I gave the green light to the bank to move forward with the strategy we discussed. 3 hours later, Pascal, my right-hand man for the last decade, stepped into my office. He laid a stack of papers in front of me, the next phase. I signed them with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. "You've earned yourself a drink," I told him, leaning back in my chair. Pascal smiled, nodded, and returned moments later with a glass of my favorite whiskey. He placed it gently on the desk. "Already confirmed?" I asked, nodding at the papers. "Sir," he said with a rare softness in his voice, "I've stood by your side for 10 years. You don't have to ask, I'll always make sure it gets done." I sipped the whiskey slowly, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The company would remain intact. And for the next 12 months at the very least, it wasn't going anywhere. "I believe the court's instructions were made perfectly clear," I said, my voice low but firm. Alistair gave a silent nod, confirming without protest. Maria stepped forward, holding out a pen with a faint, triumphant smile. "Please sign here on the dotted line so we can finish the process." One by one the rest of them returned to their seats, but the energy had shifted. There was finality in the air. I signed where she indicated, then handed the pen back. "Mark," she said sharply, turning toward me like a judge reading a sentence. "As of now, you no longer work here." Her words carried weight. She wanted to own the moment. You could hear the victory in her voice. "Are you certain about this, Maria?" I asked, giving her one last chance to reconsider. "I'm absolutely certain," she replied almost too quickly. "Very well," I said. "In that case, Miss Maria, you are now financially obligated to meet the terms of my separation." She didn't respond, but the flicker in her eyes told me she hadn't expected that. I turned and walked out, finally free. There was a strange calm to it, a peace I hadn't felt in months. I sipped my coffee, soaking in the quiet. But the peace didn't last. My phone began to buzz nonstop, and I didn't even have to look to know who was calling or why. Just as I suspected, chaos had already begun to unfold. Pascal came into my office around 11 o'clock. I handed him my phone. "Take over the incoming calls for me," I said calmly. He nodded and stepped out. Barely 5 minutes later he was back. "Alistair's on the line. Says the production line has stopped completely." I didn't even blink. Apparently, Alistair had gone into a panic, demanding to know where I was, why I hadn't been in the office. Pascal, never one to waste time, cut him off and laid out the legal problem with their plan. He explained that the attempted sale of the company was in direct violation of a current court order. The truth? The so-called buyer wasn't planning to buy anything. It was a shell play. The deal was nothing but a smokescreen designed to pass the company into new hands and continue operations under a new name. Same work, different face. But the catch? The employees would stay for now. Then they'd be reassigned, overburdened, and eventually let go. Quietly. Systematically. The transition would be spun as a leadership shuffle, nothing more. I stared out the window, jaw tight. All those lives, hundreds of them, on the edge of collapse because someone wanted a shortcut to power. Pascal looked at me. "They think it's already done." "They're wrong," I said. "They don't get to rewrite our family's legacy like this." Then I remembered something, a question I'd kept buried for too long. "Did you know about Maria's betrayal?" I asked my uncle quietly later that night. He didn't hesitate. "After I left the army, I joined the CIA. Age hasn't dulled me. I still have connections in every corner of the industry. I've kept an eye on everything, and I always know what's going on." He leaned forward, locking eyes with me. "Your father and I knew what she was up to. We had a plan in motion. That's why he placed the company in my care, not yours." His words hit me like a slow-moving train. Not out of spite, but out of protection. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. It was about preserving something that carried his name. Something we were supposed to pass on, not sell out.